why they're working in GCHQ, in the government spying agencies. You see patterns, and I was a spy as well. That's another story. For the British Army, I was a spy, official spy, not an unofficial spy, someone who's completely fantasist.
Are we speaking to James Bond here?
No, not fantasist. Just collecting intelligence on behalf of the British Army.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. You're either watching or listening to The Climb. This is the podcast produced by the Digital Mastermind. And the Digital Mastermind is a group of agency owners, technologists, marketers. It's a tribe of people that collaborate, get together, everywhere from the business owner all the way down to whoever's above the intern at your agency. And we talk about all the latest tips, tricks, strategies to help each other grow in any and every way that we can. So if you would like that for some of yourself, please go ahead and shoot me an email, Jon, Jon at digitalmastermind.com, or go ahead and check us out at digitalmastermind.com. We'd love to hear from you. Today is a special episode where it's kind of a theme, and it's an ongoing theme, which is about leadership. And we had the opportunity to speak with Jonathan Bowman-Perks. And Jonathan Bowman-Perks is an MBE. He's a captain in the Royal British Army. And I think I said that correctly. If not, Dave, please edit that part out and maybe snip some things together. But anyway, we talked about leadership, and we talked about a lot of the things that have taken place in his life. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to these things. So before I get into any of that, I want to pull Dave out here where we can riff on this before the episode starts.
Hey,
good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, and I guess a good place to start from, he mentions like there's a ton of tragedy in there, and my heart goes out to him for that type of stuff, and I'm sure others have dealt with similar things. I mean, granted, he gets into it. I mean, father dying when I think he's like 2 or 3 years old, and then there's numerous things, and even some of those that are recent. But he said something that stuck with me, that is that life's not fair. And I think that's something that not enough people really understand, and they're just confronted at whatever comes toward them rather than they have this understanding of life's not fair. What is your take on that? And do you see that statement anywhere in your life?
Well, I think from an overall perspective, I think we're living in a world right now where things aren't fair, and you're allowed to just dwell on that forever and just blame everyone else for your problems. And it's a bad place to be in, and it's not going to get you anywhere. So I believe in the adapt and overcome. If a challenge is put in you might have to, pivot and then attack it from another and get past it and get over it. I mean, your original plan may not succeed,
right? And
you may run into issues, but you better be able to get around it real quick. Else, you're going to get stuck. So I completely agree. Life isn't fair. And those that can adapt and overcome are the ones that are going to get ahead in this world.
And I think it's those that are grateful for whatever it is that they have. If they have 2 feet, if they have their eyes, or whatever. Granted, those are physical things, and even on a mental level, just really appreciate those. But I'm always inspired by those that just keep taking licks and they keep going.
Yeah,
it's not stopping. And you're talking with somebody, and you find out everything that they've overcome. And a lot of people are like, oh, wow, that's like terrible and everything. And they're just like, no, it's okay. This is his life. And you get past all these things.
It's a part of the journey. And you don't get beaten down by it, and you overcome. I mean, I see many people that just string losses together, one after another. And I just want to ask them, like, don't you see it as well? Like, what, how do you sit there and just be okay with the constant bad decisions and constant failures? But some people just don't see it like that.
Or they do. And that's the game that they play in their life, where they manufacture drama when they don't have enough of it. They don't realize that naturally, organically, there's enough of it there.
I don't keep those people in my life. So that's the quickest way to get excommunicated from me is
just cut the branches. Don't even get like, you just draining them. Just you don't try to get in somebody's world and have that conversation with them and say, hey, might want to take a look at some of these things. They could be blind spots.
I've tried with employees, and typically doesn't work. It's hard to change people. A lot of people just don't want to change. They're not capable of it. They don't have the willpower. The world that we've created, the society we've created, has allowed people to be very stubborn with not changing.
I think so, but I'm also, I guess, an optimist where I think if you point out literally things that people cannot see, and they realize that, yeah, we can all see this little game that you do, that can have a profound impact. And in some cases, I've had it backfire where they're like, oh, no, and they say all these nasty things. All right, cool, that's fine. I can be that part of your story in your journey, in your world. I can live with that. But at the end of the day, I know that I tried to do something good, and it seems like it was good to me.
So just the perception of good is good enough?
Well, perception, it's my perception. Correct. They might not perceive it that way. So I was
truth.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just trying to do my good, just trying to do what I see, and treat others how you'd want to be treated. If you're going through life and nobody's going to point out something that could easily be corrected, that could have lasting positive impacts for the rest of your life, I wouldn't be living with my own integrity if I didn't try to have that conversation with somebody. If they hate me at the end of the day, it is what it is.
Yeah, 85% of the people, though, are going to just find a way to excuse it.
Sure, but that 15% could dwarf anything that 85% could from the contribution level, and that's the positive side. Yeah.
Speaking of leadership, though, I just had a conversation with our team about that, and we just hired a new employee, and we were talking about encouraging them to be a leader, and I was like, leadership's earned, it's not given. And if you try to bestow leadership on someone, you're going to alter their route, maybe not in a positive direction. I was like,
right. Keywords maybe. Sometimes it works out.
Correct. But I mean, you have a guaranteed chance of changing their trajectory by doing that, when otherwise they can just step into it and become it. And I would rather see that happen than just tell somebody they're a leader. So I made sure to tell the person, I was like, there's a difference between the title and leadership. I was like, you can lead from any position. The title is just your ranking in the organization.
Right. And I think leading is noticing, right? So if we just go back to what it is at its root, infancy of a term, which is, let's get image based, where somebody's going over a mountain, they're going over trails, they know the way. Well, you can see that at any position. Somebody knows the way, they know where they're going, they're leading, they're taking people, others. It's not, they might be a good choice. It's substantially more than that, because if you put somebody that's a poor leader into that position, all they're going to do is get everybody lost.
Right.
And the
lead them into laziness.
Exactly. Yeah. They need to be the guide, and they need to get everybody where they need to go.
Organizers, teachers,
leaders. Yeah. It's all those things. Organizers, teachers, leaders. It's problem solvers. It's connectors, getting with people on their level. Also persuaders, persuading people to go their way. Not everybody wants to follow somebody. So you have to have some semblance of community to make sure that they do. Like, you've worked for somebody that you couldn't stand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how it's the difference between tolerance and patience, right? You're just tolerating it as long as you can, and you have a breaking point. With today, I believe people have so many choices of where they want to work. It's inherently important to make sure that you treat everybody as well as you possibly can. You remove as many obstacles as you can as a leader, and you really connect with them. Because if you don't connect with the people that you work for, I don't see that person lasting very long.
Well, that has a lot to do with our last interview. What was his name?
We haven't shown that one
we
yet.
haven't published it yet.
I was like, yeah, you want to tease it? I think.
Yeah, a little teaser is that our next interview is very much so about connecting people together in the organizations, because if you can establish that personal bond, or that personal bond, then you're going to keep somebody a lot longer, and you're going to help develop your culture. Now, I think, we can talk about it next week. He goes to the extreme, but yeah, it'll be a good interview.
I agree. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. And I think some other final points on this. This isn't necessarily our traditional interview. I'm super happy that we had Jonathan on. He tells great stories. He's overcome a ton. Everything from losing a father when he was a small child, and granted, his family and mom dynamic had a huge part in that. But he didn't look at any of those things as hindrances, so to speak. He was just like, hey, this is just something that happened. He just recently found out he's dyslexic, which I think is interesting because he was wondering, while using his words, why he thought he was so thick, right? I believe that's English for, I'm not even going to say, just you can think of whatever you think that term actually means. And he's now a very sought after leadership coach. And he's got one of the top 2% podcasts that's out there. He's got a wealth of information. So I just think there's so much that you can pull from this, and I really hope you enjoy it. I'd love to hear in the comments and in your reviews what you think about it. And other than that, Dave, you got anything else to say on this topic, or should we just let it go right into Jonathan Bowman-Perks? Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Jon. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here. Yeah, and I just want to also give a big thanks to Jeff Nishwitz. He's the one that recommended you having you on here. So I want to make sure there's a shout out to him.
He's the man. He's the man. Good old Jeff.
So before we get into all the other questions and whatnot, I'd like to start out with asking, what is your journey? What is your climb? So how did you get here?
Wow. How did I get here? That's a very interesting one. Looking back, I'm almost 60. I think back to standing at the door of a caravan on a base, and it was a Navy base, the British Navy, and their fast jet pilots worked from there. And I was just hiding behind the skirts of my mum when a chap knocked on the door, and he said, "I'm terribly sorry to tell you that your husband's been killed flying." And from that day, everything changed. I was just 2.5 years old, and mother was 33, and my father was 33. And you think 33 at the time when you're a young lad was very old. But now, as I'm approaching 60 and almost double his age, I look back and I go, he was so young when he died. And so we were no longer guests of the Navy. We were no longer wanted on that base. We got a small, tiny pension, Navy pension, and we had to leave and start again. But I was always seeking to know more about the man I never knew, my father, who by all accounts was a very heroic and very modest man. And that combination is quite a strange one. You don't often find it. Often they're braggarts and they tell you how wonderful they are. Was that famous story about how can you tell an aviator at a drinks party? And the answer is they'll tell you they're an aviator at the drinks party. Or what can you tell an aviator? You can't tell them very much. They know it all already. No, I'm just teasing. My father's friends were not like that. But when I look back at his intake from the Royal Navy College at Dartmouth, he went there when he was about 16 and trained just at the end of the Second World War. And so many of them died so young. He was on the aircraft carriers, and these big aircraft carriers like HMS Victorious, which he was on when he was killed, they would try and land on a space the size of a tennis court, right? Someone's private tennis court, not a big matched tennis court, but someone's private tennis court. This huge lumbering aircraft with big jet engines. And if they missed the deck, they either had to put the engines on again and get off, or they'd fall off the end and the ship would sail over them, which is why these days they have the launch thing at an angle. It's so that if it does come into the sea, they've got time to get out before the whole of the ship sails over them. So many of them died like my father. But anyway, so I grew up, young lad in Yorkshire in England with my mother. We didn't have very much money, but we were a lot of love. Two brothers, one's become a surgeon and became the president of the British Plastic Surgeons. And in January, just after he'd retired, and he was at home late one night, someone broke into his house, tried to commit arson to the whole house, tried to burn it down with 40 liters of fuel. and then waited for him when he came down and tried to stab him to death. And he's only just recovering from that now. And there's going to be a big court case about the man who did it. And I can't sort of say more on this, but it hit all the newspapers around the country and around the world. The next morning was a better day because I became a grandfather. And but then more tragically, just 4 weeks ago, my other brother, David, who grew up with me, has just been diagnosed with cancer throughout the whole of his body, his brain, his lungs, his back, everywhere. So you in life, you get a few surprises. Never saw that coming. With my two brothers, we were just happily pottering along, doing what we could to help other people, and then suddenly those things happen. But I think in our family, there's been various things that have happened, which have sort of shaped the attitude I have, which I have a very stoic philosophy for life, that you can't control events. It's control the controllables, and a lot of things are uncontrollable. So I couldn't control what happened to my father, or the fact that my father's father was an inventor for the War Office. But during the war, the aircraft he was on flew into a hillside, killing all the inventors who were working for the War Office. They all died. And then my father's brother was a very famous test pilot. And the helicopter they gave him to test, the inventor and he were in it when the blades fell off, which was terminal for them both because they plummeted to the ground and went about 40 foot into the ground. So in the family, when my brother was at school, my mother would come and see him. She'd say, I'm really sorry, your uncle's died, or your father's died, or your grandfather's died. So eventually, and he was away at boarding school because father being away in the Navy or having been killed. And he'd say, will you not come and see me anymore? She said, well, why not? He said, well, every time you come and see me, somebody dies because you're coming to see me. Wow. Yeah. That was tough. So there's this, things happen to people. As they say, shit happens. And it's not the fact you have a problem, it's how you handle it that marks out the good from the very average. So I didn't want to go in the Navy. I think I got a bit seasick, and I've learned now I'm dyslexic in maths, reading, writing, and spelling. But I just was told by my teacher aged about 7 that I was thick and I was going to become a dust cart man, a dustman. Because that was all I was fit for, which was really not terribly helpful as a teacher. But my mother, she said, Jonathan, you will not be a dustman. She said, you're going to be good with people. That's going to be your thing. And so, and she also said, if you go into the army later on, she said, you're going to become a general. This was her expectation theory. Her husband should have been an admiral. He was the best of his generation. They all saw he was going to be Admiral Sir Paul and Lady Perks. But clearly didn't happen. So she lived her life in a way through hoping that me, her youngest son, might succeed. But Graham did well. Dave, my middle brother, did various things which were pretty off the rails. But he was still and remains a lovely guy. Anyway, I decided not for the Navy for me, but after school, I thought I'd go and try for the Army. So at 16, I went to an Army boarding school where they trained up their technical officers. And it wasn't really quite my cup of tea, but I tried my best. I struggled a bit with the technical sides, probably because of my dyslexia, because there's a lot of maths and numerics and chemistry and physics and stuff like that. And I still had that belief I was a bit thick. So if people would say, Jonathan, you're really clever, I'd go, no, I'm thick, because that was my label from the teacher, aged 7, goodness. Watch out, teachers. What you do say to a child, they will remember it for the rest of their lives. Anyway, I get into the Army and I go to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, which is like amazing. It's tough, but it's good. And I have made lifelong friends from 40 years ago that we still have our reunions. Friends from Jamaica, Errol Stewart, who became my best man when my wife Lee and I got married 6 years ago. That was my second and my final marriage, I quickly add. And people like the assistant to the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, was at Sandhurst with me. But Anwar was he's now a Major General. He was his assistant. There's a politician in Barbados. There's a Major General in Nepal. And we all became friends, and also all these different regiments in British Army. Went through there and suddenly found that I could do things, and I could lead, and I could learn from other leaders, because I hadn't had this father figure. I'd been looking for a father figure for a long time. And anyway, had a great career. We can go into more detail of a particular time, which was a turning point, and why I'm doing what I'm doing now, which we'll save that for another time during this conversation. But I had a great time through the Army, 20 years, did my MBA, went into business. I wanted to be a business leader, and I knew it was all about people. Worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then we got bought by IBM. And so I was a senior consultant at IBM. Had a great time there. And then someone asked me to go and be a managing director at a PLC. So I did that for about 8 years, doing board executive coaching. And I loved being a player manager. I liked finding new clients and connecting with them. And I loved building up into being able to really lead others in difficult situations. And so from that moment, Sandhurst really trained me well. I went back to be an instructor, which is a time we can talk about. But I've taken the lessons from the Army and brought them into business, to business leaders. And so now what I do and have been doing for some years is, like you, I'm a podcaster, and we discussed this. It's because of the quality of the people on the podcast, nothing to do with me. I'm just the guy who finds good people. My podcast got into the top 2% of the world, and there's 180,000 people listening to it in 55 plus countries. And what they love about the people on it is their humility, their humanity, and a bit of humor. Perhaps I don't need to work on the humor, but I'm always aspiring for the humility and the humanity. And I think the final thing is that today, what I'm lucky enough to do is to meet CEOs and work with them as their trusted advisor on leadership and their executive teams, and go down through their organization. And my wife loves doing something similar to that as well. And we also run a charity because we believe in getting these leaders to put back into society, send the lift back down, Jon. And so we have this charity called the Inspiring Leadership Trust, which we can talk about later, which is for vulnerable young women who've been through abuse, modern day slavery, trafficking, mental health issues. And we get these business leaders to help coach and mentor these people and be speakers at events to give them inspiration and help the volunteers. So there's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I can say more, but it's over to you, Jon.
Yeah, no, that's an impressive journey. I love it. One thing that stuck out to me was, how did you not become numb based on all of those things occurring in your life? And was there a point of distinction where you realized your point of view that you mentioned based on the events?
Yeah, I think during all those experiences, I think I was quite young. So everybody was dying when I was, or being killed. Actually, they were being killed. Let's not beat around the bush. They were killed. 3 of them were killed way before their time. But as somebody said to me, your father lived his whole life. It just was 33 years. That was all his life was. But it just seemed so cruelly short when he was such a fine man. And as I'll tell maybe later on his story, he was a genuine hero. And he died saving the lives of 2 other pilots. And you meet some complete heels and some really unpleasant characters. I'm listening to Kleptocracy, or Kleptopia it's called. It's all about Russian mafia and dirty money, and it's true stories. And Tony Blair, trying to help the president of dodgy, former Russian countries, and money going everywhere in the wrong. And you go, why are those guys living such long lives, living such great time, when my father was killed at 33 and he was honest and had high integrity, served his country and died for his country? But these people are just complete plagues on society: prostitution, racketeering, drugs dealings, arm trading, you name it, they'll do it. So I think that the lesson that I've learned, Jon, life's not fair. Get over it. I think there was a book, The Road Less Traveled, by M. Scott Peck. And his opening line is, life is not fair. When you accept that life's not fair, it's much easier. But just stop railing against it and, shaking your fist at the gods or your God, whoever it is, going, why me? Well, just learn from it. And so I think you asked a really profound question. I think it's made me always learn from other people, you, everybody else I meet. Someone once said to me, imagine that everybody else is enlightened, Jon, everybody you meet, apart from me. And so how can I learn from these enlightened beings who are around me? That's maybe a bit extreme. I quite like the one, everybody has something to teach you if only you'd listen. And I have lessons to learn from the kleptocrats and the criminals, not how to be like them, but how not to be. In fact, that tells me a story of a Russian. He was a banker working for one of the famous investment banks, which will remain nameless. But he said, I've heard about you, and you're really good. You work with these CEOs and these top people. I said, okay, well, thank you. That's very kind. He said, now, this is what my bosses are like. And he described his bosses. And I go, well, they're psychopaths. they're white collar psychopaths. And he goes, right, okay. And I said, do you want to know what their qualities are like? I've got a checklist of hunting psychopaths. I hunt psychopaths. Not that I want to work with them. I want to get rid of them and fire them from their roles and get them out of it, because you can't change them. And he looks at this list and he goes, yep. And this long list of things. And he goes, can you train me? I said, yeah, I'll help you learn how to avoid them and get away from them, often emigrate. No, I want to be like them. And I go, oh, no, not me. And I passed him on to someone else. I will, I escorted him out of my office and said, it's not for me. But, some of these people want to be like that because they see it as the means to an end. So I do think, I had an upbringing. My family's about 6 generations of Quakers who were often very good at listening and creating a thinking environment. And so that's why I came across a nice lady called Nancy Klein, who's written a number of books about how to create a thinking environment. So I find that's a philosophy that underpins my work with teams and leaders, so they stop assaulting each other's thinking and listen to each other and ignite thinking. But also, I do find the whole Stoic philosophy from 2,000 years ago of Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. Every morning, the first thing I wake up to hear, because I'm dyslexic, so I'm listening to audio, is The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, which is an American author. And he's put together The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, and The Daily Stoic. And I just cycle through probably about 10 minutes worth of just wisdom from the Antonian plague, which killed 24 million. There's a repeat going on. There's a plague. It's just slightly different. And the fact that he fought in the forests of Hungary and Germany for 19 years before he ultimately died of the Antonian plague himself. But he kept going and he kept a positive mindset. So I keep a positive mindset despite whatever's being thrown at me. And at the moment, there's quite a few things coming my way, and they're all to teach me a lesson. Do you find the same for you, Jon?
I believe firmly that lessons are everywhere and you can learn from everybody, good or bad. I think that's one of the good things about peer groups, for sure, where whether it's somebody that's well advanced in where you want to be in your career or where they're at with their business, or even somebody that's new, young, and nimble, they're going to be taking on larger risks than you. They're going to potentially do things quicker, where you have a larger ship. It's going to take longer to turn it. So yeah, I'm a firm believer of that.
Yeah. Very true.
When it comes to where you learned the leadership qualities, you mentioned the military. I mean, where there are certain things that stand out to you that were potentially milestones, yet for instance, the distinction where it's like, all right, I'm no longer thick, right? Were there other leaders that left an impression on you?
Yeah. My 20 years in the military had a profound positive impact. There were moments when it was pretty crap and I was wet and cold and miserable, but then so was everybody else. But that taught me to be resolute and endurance. I think there was, the moment when actually it dawned on me that I wasn't thick, and I didn't know at the time it was dyslexia. I only learned about the fact I was truly diagnosed as dyslexic last year, aged 59. But I think a profound moment about turning me into hopefully the leader I am today. But my calling is inspiring leadership. That's why I do what I do. I think it was Mark Twain who said the 2 most important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you found out why. And I found out why on a day when I was an instructor at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. And I had a career in the previous 6 years, which had been meteoric. I'd been getting outstanding reports. I was winning awards as the best officer. I was very driven and determined. and probably a bit too driven and determined. I think I wasn't looking after my peer group. I was more busy trying to please a sort of father figure who I was missing, perhaps. The psychologist would have a complete field day with me. I think I'd be committed to some asylum if they'd looked into my psychology. But I was very good at looking after my own team and really cared and looked after them. I got to Sandhurst because it was like Top Gun school, Sandhurst. It's like the best officers, and West Point, the best officers in each of their regiments or corps are sent to be an instructor and a role model to the young officer cadets who are civilians being trained to become officers. And we had to teach them, manners and behavior, not manners so much, but, how to behave under pressure and under fire, and how to look after your soldiers and to eat last, after your soldiers had, and serve to lead was the motto. Anyway, I got my first report there, and it said they sort of questioned my judgment, which was death in the army to have your judgment questioned. And also I was average. And what? Average? I've never been average before. What do you mean I'm average? And I thought, I'm sure my father never did average. And so I thought, I need to know more about the man I never knew, my father. What did he do? How can I learn from a good leader? Because I'm clearly not a good leader and I need to become better. Where's my role models? And so I wrote to the Fleet Air Officers Association. I said, anybody knew Commander Paul Perks killed 1964 in Changi? He was commanding officer of 801 Squadron. Would they write to his son, Jonathan, who wants to know more about the father he never knew? I got 30 letters, John, from all over the world. Admirals, all sorts of different people who'd left the Navy but done other things. And they were just deeply moving. They were also quite funny. The military have this black humor. They said, yeah, I remember at your father's funeral service, because his body was, shipped off the aircraft carrier at sea, but they had a funeral service on land because it was in dock at the time. We were going into the cemetery, but went into the Chinese cemetery by accident with all the vehicles. And we all had to reverse out and go to the other one. He said, your father would have been sitting on a cloud laughing, going, I can't believe this. And then they said, we met the wreckage of the Buccaneer aircraft that he died in. It joined it was on its way to the docks and it was carrying the wreckage of the vehicle. And it just joined the funeral cortege. You just like, this couldn't be making this up. So anyway, they got all these lovely letters, and I thought I'd like to meet some of these guys who'd served with my father, because I just don't know my father. My aunt is now 90, and I'm going to go and see her with my wife, Lee. We're going to go and visit her. She's in good health, and she was the twin to Paul. It was Paul and Pauline, and Pauline is still alive. So I'm going to go and visit her in Cornwall, which I'm looking forward to in the summer. And anyway, so I get about 6 of them, and I invite them for lunch. They live nearby. And we're having this lovely lunch in the officers' mess at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst with pictures of heroes daring do and stabbing the enemy and fighting through and doing all this kind of heroic things that leaders are supposed to do. And there I am, this guy who's only average and whose judgment is poor, trying to learn from these guys about the man I never knew. And one of the guys, after a few glasses of wine, he said, Jonathan, let's call him Ted. I'd rather protect his name. He said, Jonathan, your father bought my ticket. I said, what do you mean? He said, your father died in my airplane. I should be dead and he should be here having lunch with you. I said, how long have you carried that thought? He said, 30 years, every day, 30 years. And I said, look, for what it's worth, as his youngest son, I release you from any obligation, because as a leader, he was the commanding officer. He was the CEO, call it. His job was to make sure you were safe as the new young pilots. And he may have been 33, but I think you were 25 at the time. And he was the best pilot. So he was checking out all of these new Mark I Buccaneers because they knew they had a fault. And he thought that at least I can understand it, deal with it, get it back for repair. So he was up above Changi in Singapore, doing the circus with it. And sure enough, I met a man in the park the other day whose father was the chief engineer on 801 Squadron. Can you imagine the coincidence of this? Wow. And he said, I've got the air accident report from your father's death. And he said what happened was one of the blades on the turbine had a fault on it, a crack, which split. The blade spun off, went straight through the fuel lines into the aircraft and caused a huge fire. And sure enough, there was this fire. And my father said, I'm bringing it in. We need to find out what the fault is. Those were his last words. He banged out, like in Top Gun, remember Top Gun with Goose?
Oh, yeah.
He banged out his co-pilot, Bill White, who lived. And my father tried to fight the fire, but the flames were all over the place. And he then banged out, but it misfired. It was a fault, another fault for the aircraft. And it sent his ejector seat at 200 miles an hour into the tailpiece. And his body wasn't found for 2 days. It was out at sea somewhere. And Bill said to me, that was when the naval officer knocked on the door of my mother's caravan and said, I'm terribly sorry to tell you that your husband has been killed. And when my whole life changed, or the course of my life. And he said, but you have a choice, Jonathan. We always have choice between stimulus and response. We always have a choice. You have a choice. He said, you can go, poor me, I'm a victim. Dad was killed when I was 33. We didn't have much money. 3 boys on our own with a mother, no father figure. Woe is me. Everything that goes wrong is because I didn't have a father. He said, you can have that approach and look for fault. Or you can choose your father, who was an inspirational leader. He inspired me and he saved his life, saved my life too. He said, he ejected me. And you can look for other men and women who were inspiring like him, and your mother, who was a philanthropist. She went on to do lots of work for others to help other people less fortunate than herself, even though she had very little. And he said, find those men and women, or learn from them, and pass it on to other people so they can become more inspiring leaders and look after those below them. And that's why I'm doing what I do now, Jon.
Where you just learned that you had dyslexia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're 59. Looking back now that you have that, has that helped you?
It's explained. It made sense of a lot of things. I mean, for example, when I left the army, I'd done my MBA in the army, and that was a really useful thing. I was the chief of staff of the army's largest regional brigade, big job. And I said to the brigade commander, I was like his sort of top staff officer. I said, I want to do an MBA, distance learning. We have a thing called the Open University. And I said, but it's probably not a good time. He said, Jonathan, it's never a good time, but you will make the time. You've got a wife, my first wife at the time, and my 2 daughters, Harriet and Bryony, who are lovely. And they're now I've just celebrated Harriet's 28th, and Bryony's about to celebrate her 27th. They're both very balanced, lovely, emotionally intelligent kids, both in tech companies, both got boyfriends of 10 years or so. Really so proud of them both. He said, so just go and do it. You will never regret doing your MBA. And sure enough, I never did. And I'm always grateful to Brigadier Austin Thorpe for that. And so having done the MBA, it was an easy transition into PricewaterhouseCoopers. But I was going for McKinsey as well, because I always set myself ridiculously high bars. And I thought, McKinsey, that's the consultancy firm to work for. Because I've done my MBA, where do you go? McKinsey, some of these Bain, some of these other ones. And I just did an interview with a lovely guy, Brigadier Longstaff, I think was his name. Anyway, he was ex-military, and he had a bit of a chat. I wasn't really trying to get in. I was just talking about life after the army. What should I do? And he said, I think you should apply for McKinsey. I think you'd be a fantastic leader at McKinsey. He said, I know you're older than the average. I forgot what I was. I was coming up to 40 or something. He said, you're older than we normally take them in, but I'll make an exception. Anyway, so he gave me lots of interviews and different people. It was all going really well until, Jon, the moment where they went, right, Jonathan, mental maths now. Last year, Tesco made 48.29 million. This year, they're going to make 23% less. How much is that? And I went, can I have a calculator? They went, no, just in your head. I just couldn't do it. They went, okay, well, look, and what about this? And they gave lots of other questions, and I was just plowing it. And they went, well, here's a test. Do a quick fire. You got half an hour. Do as many questions as you can. Oh God, it was just my worst nightmare. All of my past catching up with me. And of course, my spelling is a bit of a horrendous one. I can write. I'm reasonably eloquent, but there's some howlers if I ever write to you. Forgive me now. It's voice activated software. And in fact, that's one of the things that links me to my brother David, who's sadly dying of cancer, is that before he could call me, we'd have a chat every day. Now he can't talk. really very well because it's affecting his speech. So he'll dictate what he's saying, and you just know he's getting worse because the words are more jumbled and jumbled. So it just that connected with me for a moment. And that's another thing as dyslexics, you see lots of connections with things, which is why they're working in GCHQ, in the government spying agency, because you see patterns. And I was a spy as well. That's another story. For the British Army, I was a spy, official spy, not an unofficial spy. I'm not trying to be someone who's completely fantasist.
Are we speaking to James Bond here?
No, not fantasy. Just collecting intelligence on behalf of the British Army for GCHQ. But I completely plowed it, and I didn't get into McKinsey. But what was so interesting was I hadn't got the results from that, hadn't had that moment, and I had my interview with PwC. And the partner, lovely lady, Jan Burrows, I think Jan, not Burrows, but Jan anyway, it was her surname, her first name. And she said, Jonathan, I see you're also got interviews with McKinsey. What would happen if McKinsey offered you twice as much as us? And I said, without a pause, I said, I'd feel undervalued by you. And they went, oh, I like that one. I like that one. You're in. Now, that was just the final, it was her final trick question at the end. But so I got into PwC, and I had a great time in PwC. But doing management consultancy, learning a lot. So I worked as assistant to the head of the army. I worked for General the Lord Dannit when he was commanding officer. I was a young company commander. We were doing air mobile flying in. We had June buggies and we had SES light strike vehicles. We were coming in under helicopters. I did my airborne training, got my parachute wings and my maroon beret, and that was fun. So I did lots of fun stuff, and particularly working for General Lord Dannit. He is one of the finest leaders I've ever worked for, and was a great inspiration and a father figure. Working for the Field Marshal Lord Inge, he was a tougher character and not really such a role model to me. He made it to the top, became head of all the armed services. But I learned a lot about how not to do things from watching the way he treated certain people. Dignity wasn't a thing that he used with people. It was more fear and his drive to make things happen. And that was disappointing because I thought working as his assistant, I'd learned so much from him. I did, but not the things I thought I'd learned. But from Richard Dannit, I learned how to be calm under pressure. And this is a man who got fired on by the IRA when he was in the street as a young platoon commander. The IRA shot from the front and behind. He was hiding behind an armored vehicle and returning fire, but they deliberately had a sniper behind them as well up the street who shot and killed his sergeant and his signaller, but he lived in between. And that was a real shock and a wake-up story for him. He also, as a young officer, while returning from Germany on one big exercise, tired, fell asleep and his vehicle went off the motorway. Now they have these big tank trap, these ditches, V-shaped ones to stop Russian tanks crossing the autobahns. People wouldn't have known that, but that's why they were designed that way. Luckily for him, at 60 miles an hour, when he came off the motorway, he just happened to hit a 50-meter stretch, which had a little bridge into a farmer's field. And so he woke up in the farmer's field and he wasn't dead. And then when he was working for Field Marshal Inge, who was the commanding officer and he was the adjutant, he had a stroke in the while he was just popping to the gents. He had a stroke and they were all out on parade. They didn't know where he was. And luckily someone came back to look for him and found him collapsed. And those three things, were a bit of a wake-up call to him about to prioritize what matters. And I think, John, circling back to some of the earlier conversations, I found with the tragedy of someone trying to murder my brother and commit arson and kill the rest of his family, and then David dying with just months to go of terminal metastatic cancer, and then the three members of my family being killed as well, that you just don't know when your number's up. So I don't live in fear of it. Actually, quite the contrary, make the most of every minute of every day. And before I came on this call, I took Archie, who's somewhere out here, crashed out, I forgot where he is. He's at my feet somewhere asleep, my little working Cocker Spaniel, little brown thing. So you're disguised, you won't see him behind in the brown. But I took him out for a walk and the sun had come out and there was rapeseed, which is bright yellow in all the fields and rolling hills. And I just think, this is beautiful. And look up the trees. What happened if I lost my sight today? Would I just remember this vision of what I had and how lucky I am? So I do aim to live by success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you already have. And time and again, particularly as the times have got tougher in the last few months, and my mother-in-law, who we cared for 3 years here in this house, we had her staying with us. She had cancer, she had heart disease, she had lung disease, and her Alzheimer's was getting worse. She had everything. Lovely little Irish lady and very dear to us. But she died a few months ago, and that was tough. But in all that, my wife and I, Lee and I, have become even closer, and we value every moment. And I think people are often complaining, grumbling about this or that isn't right, or I want this, or I'll be happy when I have this. I think that's the wrong attitude. Be happy now with whatever you've got. And more stuff doesn't make people happy. They think it will. They chase the Yankee dollar, but it doesn't, because the happiness is inside your head and the attitude you have. And so I'm grateful every day for good friends I have, interesting clients I work with, and the love of my wife, my daughter, my two daughters, and I've got a stepson and a stepdaughter, again about 29 and 25, and now I'm a grandfather. So yeah, those are the things that matter. People think so many other things, but they don't. Those things matter.
I agree. I think it's actually, that's why the name of this podcast is The Climb. You have to enjoy that climb. It's never about the destination.
Yeah. And actually, let's go to your story of the climb, because I think that's a very good analogy. And I've scaled a few big mountains in my time, not always pickaxe and pitons. We've had to rope up at times, because if you slip, you'd go over the gorge or something. Whether it be Mount Kinabalu in where's it, Seba Kinabalu, it's Brunei, or different mountains in the Canadian Rockies or the American ranges of mountains. I think when you're going up over glaciers and things like that, you do need to work together as a team. I've just been reading Endeavour about Sir Ernest Shackleton. Hey, that is a book you've got to read, Endeavour by about Sir Ernest Shackleton. Oh, just if you ever think you've had a bad day, listen to that audio book. I've forgotten who Lansing is the author. I've forgotten his first name, but Lansing is the surname, and it's about Sir Ernest Shackleton and the Antarctic expedition. So he sailed his boat, the Endeavour, down there to get on and go across the glaciers of the Antarctic. But it got caught in pack ice, and slowly, bit by bit, it crushed the boat to death with about 28 of them on board. And they then got the dogs and everything else off onto the pack ice, and they were living on the pack ice in tents. And then eventually the whole boat disappears after a few weeks. And then they're on this pack ice floating around the Weddell Sea going, we've got to find some dry land. We've got 3 20-foot boats, which are like little sort of rowing boats with a small sail. We'll have to find a way to get off. But if they couldn't get off into the cracks between the ice, because it would close again and crush the boats. And so they had to wait till they got to the open sea, and they were drifting around, getting closer to the land, and then it would go away again. And just they thought they're almost there, it would be stolen from them, and they'd lose it. And it's a hell of a story where everybody lived. They got them to Elephant Island. And then this is all in 1917. So they left when war had just been declared between Germany and England. England declared war on Germany because Germany had declared war on the others, and so on. And they've gone through France. And they came back in 1917. And in this little boat, Shackleton and 2 others tried to get to South Georgia. And it was 500 miles from Elephant Island. And they had this little sextant and a bit of a chronograph, their watch. And that was about it. And they hardly any sun to do the settings of where they were going. If they missed South Georgia, which is a tiny set of islands, the next thing was South Africa, which is like 2,000 miles beyond that. They hadn't got enough food. They would have died. So it's like they've got to get the navigation right. And there were storms, and this little boat was being thrown around. It was the worst weather in the world, is down that part of the world. But they make it to South Georgia, but they land on the wrong side, and the rudder's gone. And you go, we can't get round to the whaling station to get help to get the guys off. So then they have to go over the mountains. No one had ever been over that part of the mountains. It's so dangerous, so difficult. And until 1955, when a whole explorer team retraced it with the full kit, everything, oxygen mask, the whole lot. These guys had 20 foot of rope, some old boots with nails knocked into them, and soggy, wet woolen clothing in Arctic conditions. And they made it to the whaling station. And after 4 attempts, they eventually got the guys off Elephant Island and they returned as heroes. But if you think you've got a bad day, read that book and just realize you've just not even begun.
And I want to correct my statement. It actually is about the destination based on that story. So the destination plays a role, but yeah, the climb is something, and the journey is something you have to enjoy, because what is that destination without the climb?
Correct. And also when people ask me, what are you going to do when you grow up? I still don't know. No, I do know. I mean, for me, my life calling is about inspiring leadership in others, in myself, finding inspiring leaders, developing inspiring leaders, and life is the journey. It's not the destination. When you get there, people go, I'm here now. What happens now? And you go, there's always the next one and the next one. And I've summited many times on different mountains and things. And you think you've got to the summit, and you look up, and through the mist you go, oh no, this isn't it at all. There's more. Oh no.
Which is brutal on hikes. I've done the same thing, and just like, oh, mother of
God. But also, John, I don't know about you on your hikes, but I think it's so important just to stop, have a drink, or if you're an Englishman, have your cup of tea, which I don't need to have that anymore. I've gone past that, and look back down on the view and the lakes right down there. I think particularly on the Great Divide in Canada, Mount Assiniboine, and some of the beautiful views and some of the color. I can even see it now, the color of those metallic lakes with all the different minerals in them, such bright blues and greens, and enjoy that view, because all too often people are working, busy, dead. Now, why not just enjoy the climb on the way? Some people on some of the toughest climbs, they hook themselves up on a sheer face on a little hammock kind of thing, and they sleep on the rock face. So however difficult it is, still take time to enjoy the view, experience it, and then celebrate when you get to that stage of the journey.
Which is an interesting question, because based on celebrating the things that you've done, right? Where is that balance between humility and arrogance, right? Is it just an internal thing where you're appreciating, or is it something that's shared outward? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very good one. Well, I was brought up by a mother who would always say things like, don't get too big for your boots. And yes, dear, very nice. And I go, Mother, I've just won this, or I've just come top of that. And she'd go, yes, dear, it's very nice. And what did you have for lunch today? She'd move the topic on straight away. She wouldn't always let you celebrate. So I think it's really quite a skill that we always have to work at. It's a bit like mindfulness when you're trying to, I do it every day as part of my mental health. And I'm happy to talk to you about rituals and routines and how that helps people, particularly in the pandemic. It's very important. But your mind drifts off, and then it comes back on, and it drifts off and it comes back on. And I think keeping yourself focused when you can easily get adrift is quite important.
Okay. And I want to jump back to one thing that I've noticed, the kind of a recurring theme based on your leadership and I believe your coaching. Like, what do you believe, if you were to give advice to other leaders, what is the relationship between that father figure that you've sought out your whole life and then that you've mentioned, and leadership? And it could just be paternal, maternal, however, like, what is the relationship between those two?
Yeah, it's a good friend of mine, Stephen Kuhn, who's written a book called Unleash Your Humble Alpha. And it's about being an alpha male or alpha female, but with humility. And I do think, and I didn't really, I went off on a tangent, didn't fully answer your last question, but I think to celebrate is important. Often it's to recognize others. So, for example, I was very lucky. I got made by the Queen. I got a member of the British Empire, MBE. And that was a great ceremony. It's very special. I went to see her, and she personally hung the medal on my chest, and I was there in full uniform, and it was a really special occasion. But she knew me, and she knew my name. I don't know how. She didn't have an earpiece. She'd done her brief, and she made me feel like I was the only person in the room, and I wasn't even getting a knighthood. I was my honor was nothing compared to that. But it wasn't, although we call MBE my bloody effort and OBE's other buggers' efforts, actually MBE was because I was the chief of staff of a very good team in the brigade headquarters, who together we trained with the Australians, Americans, the Canadians, we had a French Canadian, and the New Zealanders to train up the Australians to prevent the East Timor massacre as the UN. And we used our skills and experience in Northern Ireland and Bosnia. We took a team of 120 and we trained up with them. And because of that and the way the headquarters went well and we all worked together, I got the award, but the award is for a team. So I think people can often go, that was all about me. Yeah, I think a culture is often set by the woman or the man in charge. I'm not a great believer in patriarchal or matriarchal organizations. Yes, I may have referred to the fact that I was looking for father figures and things like that. But I think in some ways that was a bit of a mistake because it made me too keen to please upwards. And I think in my first marriage, one of the attractions was that I was getting a father-in-law who was a brigadier, but actually he wasn't kind of the man I thought he was. And so I didn't really learn from him at all, but I thought I was going to. So I think you can put too high an expectation on other people of what they're going to do for you, but actually it has to come from within you. It's in here, and you've got to draw on the reserves in yourself. But what you can do, and I find this quite helpful, is you have your support team. So when you go into a fray, a difficulty, tough time, getting a grilling or whatever it might be, something that's awful that's coming up and it's going to be tough, you have this metaphorical collection. For me, it's my father and my mother. They're not alive anymore. It might be Richard Dannit and Dave Hudson, who's a friend of mine who served in the SAS.
Just like your own personal board?
It's my own personal board, the board I couldn't afford. And it's just, they're all there with me. And I go, well, if you were here, what would you do? And I just sort of listen to what comes back. I don't often do that. I don't imagine I'm carrying this baggage around with me, but just there are moments when you think, no one's here to see what you do, but you are seeing. Look in the mirror, look at yourself, the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror. Are you proud of what you're doing? No one else will know what you're doing. Just like the greatest charity is when you or I give to somebody else in an envelope in the middle of the night through their letterbox, knowing that they're on hard times, and you give them £100, and it will make a huge difference to them. But you don't go and tell everybody, I've given £100 to this person who was having a difficult time. You just do it. That's the greatest level of charity, when you don't have to sing and dance about it, or people who want something named after them, a museum named after them, or something else. So they're always remembered. But people forget, they look at the name, they've got a clue who it is. But they want to be immortal. The fact is, we're all dying. So while you're here, be here now. Be with the people you're with in the moment of time you're in, and value what you're doing. Make those people feel special because you're genuinely interested in them.
I like the idea that you gave of like a board of mentors to kind of maybe think through different issues. As far as your coaching, like what are some of the things that you see that are continually getting in the way of top leaders? Is there any pattern there?
Yeah, very interesting. Well, it is a real joy. And in about half an hour, I'm going to do my own podcast where I'm interviewing a lady from one of the vice presidents for the Hilton Hotels Group. She's very, very successful international head. And it will be interesting to hear about, I know some of her story already, but hearing her story. And so I've learned, I've interviewed about 160 different CEOs and different leaders, and they all have different stories, different experiences, but there are some common themes that go on. But you have to intuitively pick up some of the themes, not the presenting issues, but the real issues that are behind this. They often say, these are the issues. Then you do 360 on people, which I find invaluable, because otherwise you and your client will collude. And they go, I'm really good at this, but I'm not good at that. Work with me on that. And you go, but what do the others think? Yeah, they agree. Okay, well, that's fine. I'm just going to interview about 8 to 10, and I'll do a 360 survey with another 20. And then let's look at what they say are the top 2 behaviors that you need to work on, and we'll work on those 2. And we'll only judge success if the 8 stakeholders that you choose, including your boss, a couple of peers and direct reports, maybe a customer or 2, if they say you've improved with another survey, and you keep getting feedback and feed forward from them month in, month out. So they go, these are the 2 behaviors, might be listening better to others and holding people to account. Let's say that's what you're working on, Jon. And so I get them to talk to those 8 agreed stakeholders who are part of their program. So like there's me and 9 other coaches. But it's not whether I and the CEO think he's improved. I only get paid if the 8 stakeholders say he's improved, according to some criteria and scoring system. And if he hasn't improved according to them, I don't get paid. Now, I call that skin in the game. Not many people do that. They have a lovely chat together. They talk each week or twice a month. And people go, what are they talking about? Don't know what they're working on. What behaviors are they working on? Don't know, haven't seen anything. Have you seen any change? Not really, no. So it can be, there's too many people who got into, I'm a coach. Hi, I've just done a course this weekend. I'm a coach, let me charge you this or that. Have you got the battle scars? Have you been a managing director, as I'm lucky enough to have been? Have you made mistakes? Have you been on operations where you're bricking it because you're scared and they're all scared, and they look to you and they go, what do we do now, boss? And you're thinking to yourself, I don't know what to do. I go, okay, well, guys, quickly, what do you think? A couple of ideas. Okay, right. I like that one. But that, okay, what we can do is this: follow me, not on you go. Good luck. Bye, guys. Hope you live. It's like, follow me. And if I get taken down, you go with me. But if we do well, we do well together. And I think of some of the different leaders I have. And if I talk about the finest, and then the trends I see among the finest, most inspired leaders, and then some of the complete shitehawks who are really the psychopaths, then we'll compare the 2. But if I think about the men and women who really are inspiring leaders, not just as CEOs, but aspiring to be at any particular position, they have the humanity, the humility, a bit of humor. But I suppose if you look on my website, jonathanperks.com, you'll see the compass that my wife and I have both written books. Mine's Inspiring Leadership, hers is Inspiring Women Leaders. And the research that we've done and we've designed the psychometric is around MQ. Firstly, it's sort of 8 components. MQ, they have the finest leaders have very high integrity. That essentially people trust them. And like my father's guys, they would die for him. My father's navigator said, Father, your father died saving me, and he was flying this man's plane. So integrity, doing the right thing. And I know, looking back over my time, there's times when I haven't done the right thing, and I'm appalled by that. I look back and I agonize over that, but I move on as long as I've learned from it and don't do it again. So integrity, values, beliefs, principles, what I was brought up on, what you're brought up on. And that's why it's always interesting, Jon, to ask these leaders or anybody you meet, what's your life story? What has shaped you? I mean, you talked about in the climb, how has got from where you were to where you are now? And what shaped you? Who shaped you? You've heard my father, my mother, Richard Dannit, people like that, Dave Hudson, who we did airborne training together. You learn from these people. The ones who don't are the Russian, with his wanting to be a psychopath like the other guys in the investment bank. And there are people who'll do whatever it takes to get their Ferrari in their investment bank or wherever they are, and they'll do the mortgage-backed securities, and now they've got over that, they'll try some new scam. So that's the first one, MQ. The second one is PQ, which is meaning and purpose, quotient, PQ, purpose quotient. Like, why do you do what you do? I told you that for me, it was about living my life on purpose, not off purpose, which is about inspiring leadership and the 2 most important days in your life. And those guys saying to me, you have a choice. And I chose this route that I'm on now, which is why we're talking. HQ is the next one, health quotient, mental and physical health and well-being, and the really inspiring leaders. By the way, on the PQ, you can tell that the inspiring leaders have a clear vision, a mission. They're the chief reminding officers. They tell people what the purpose is of the organization. They have mission-driven organizations with a cause. But the ones who are awful leaders, they have no purpose apart from paying off their mortgage or having a bigger car or making lots of money. That's not a purpose. That's just avarice. But the health quotient, the really inspiring leaders, constantly keeping themselves fit and healthy. I was working out in my garage, which I've converted into a gym. I train probably 5 days a week, and then I do yoga on the other days, because it's a key part of, healthy body, healthy mind, and mental health is a scourge of businesses at the moment. Many of them have got a real problem. We could perhaps talk about that if we've got a few minutes. It's a big area. But people looking after their mental and physical health and nutrition. I've got a nutritionalist and what I eat and put into my body. I went vegan for a while, came off that, but I eat very healthily and I fast. So I'm on 85 days of intermittent fasting. So 16 hours of fasting and then 8 hours of eating. And I have a little app, which I follow, and I've religiously nailed it for 86 days. I'm probably going to be the way I'm going to do it all the time. And I feel really good on it. And the brain works well. You get, ketosis, which is a burning of certain fats, help your brain work. You probably know all about this, Jon. And then autophagy, which is to destroy the folded proteins and the damaged cells, which could become cancerous. And this is very close to my heart, having read a lot about cancer. And with David, with his terrible final months of his life, with all these different cancers that he's got, that comes to mind. So that from health quotient, I won't spend time on this long, but you can go on to cultural quotient, how you get on with different people, emotional intelligence quotient, emotional and social, resilience, brand and reputation quotient, and then your legacy that you leave. But I don't want to take too much time on that, but we could talk about that another time.
No, I appreciate it. And this is all in your book, you said?
It's in my book, Inspiring Leadership. It's also on the website. So you'll find my website. People can find me, Jonathan Bowman-Perks, or just JonathanBowman-Perks.com. And they can go in there and see little videos about the different components. And I find that's the work I tend to do with the CEOs, is measure their inspiring leadership quotient, look at these different elements, and then also look at how others in 360 feed them. And then what's their team like? What's their executive team? Because it's fascinating. Executive teams are very hard to get right. It's all well and good working one-on-one. Most people can successfully work one-on-one. Being a team coach, that's the toughest gig in town, because you've got multiple things you're trying to study, and particularly trying to do it virtually like we are doing now, Jon, as you know from your own experience. You've got to be reading so many different people and picking up certain cues in their face.
What do you recommend for somebody to be a better team coach?
So
what do you recommend for somebody to be a better team coach?
Well, certainly I've done a number of courses on it. I'm a bit of a lifelong learner. So I'm always learning, reading. I probably listen to 120 to 160 audiobooks a year. I'm just soaking them up. I was listening about.
Can you apply them with reading that many? Like that's
Yeah. It's just one of the things about being dyslexic is I pick out the best of it. And if you go to my website, I put my sort of favorite 30 or 40 books on there, just with short reviews and a link to Audible and Amazon, so people can go and buy the book they want on there. But I picked up my favorites. But I do find there's many things I'm not good at, Jon. But one of the things I am good at is I am ferocious at consuming quality leadership, neuroscience, nutrition, cancer books, health, well-being. It's probably driven from my teacher telling me I was thick and going to become a dustman. I'm still, I'm a visiting professor at a business school. I'm still trying to prove to some long dead, bitter and twisted spinster that I'm not thick. When I don't know why, but one of the benefits of that is that I just consuming this in order to share it with you and others. I'll be able in the middle of a team event go, there's a great book called The Promise by Nancy Klein, and it says a couple of these things in there. Or you might want to read the book by the captain of the USS Santa Fe, and it's called Leadership is Language. And it comes from this sort of like this computer in there, pulls out files and goes, that's useful for that person, or give them a tip or a quote or something like that. It's not to try and show how smug and clever I am, but genuinely to help people. And they take it, they absorb it, and then they play it back to me about 5 years later. They go, and remember this, John? I go, oh, that's I like that. They go, well, you told me that. I went, oh, all right, okay. I'd forgotten it, but they hadn't. And a bit like my mentors, they've taught me things that I've never forgotten.
So you dealt with pressure in training, you said earlier on in your career and whatnot. Do you help leaders through that now? And if so, like what are some great tools to deal with pressure?
Yeah, there is a lot of pressure around at the moment. And when I think back to some of my tours in Northern Ireland or Bosnia or different places around the world where we were on operations, we'd go for 6 months and it would be full on. You probably wouldn't be sleeping more than 4 to 6 hours, which is not good for decision making anyway. We know now, but at the time we didn't realize what an impact it would have. So you're constantly sleep deprived, under pressure, things are going on, events are happening, bombings, shootings. Some Serb general, his people are trying to break the Dayton Peace Accord, and there's dramas going on. So you got to drive there with your tank and get out and face up to him, and it's all a bit about body language. There's another story about that. Tell me about the tanks another day. But that kind of pressure is hard, and a number of people crack or get PTSD from that. Certainly friends of mine who've been in the Falklands War, I just missed it by a couple of years, but I served as a platoon commander with the Scots Guards who'd just come back from the Falklands War. And so my platoon had been to war, many of them, and I learned a lot from them of how they coped, and some who didn't cope. And the people who you think will do well, and they're the sort of big, burly, self-confident, they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. Do you know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is? The Dunning-Kruger effect, 2 guys, and they said, it's where your confidence is more than your competence.
Wouldn't it figured out in like a prison or something?
I'm not sure, but a lot of research was done. It's quite interesting. It's a hypothesis. It's not necessarily the truth, but you come across politicians. We have one, you've had some, who just believe they're God's gift, but actually their competence doesn't match their confidence. And so you've got to be quite careful. So those who were big brash and thought they were God, they crumbled. And the ones who were the quieter, more introverted ones, some of them stepped forward and took command when the ones who were appointed leaders crumbled or got shot or got killed. But in real life, that's real life too. But in business life, where rarely do they have to die for their job, which we did have to die for our jobs, or were prepared to die, you want somebody else to die for their cause rather than you to die for your cause. And that's normally the enemy. But that's another story in itself. But in this one, it is about being centered and grounded, having a routine, having a faith, or having some underpinning foundational values, a clear sense of purpose and a legacy that you want to leave things better than you found them, and that people trust you and they will follow you because they know you do things for the right reasons for them rather than you're just self-serving. And I think when you're working in an organization which has got a healthy culture, where you're well led or you're leading well, and you pace yourself, because people are working too hard. We did tours in the army, and it'd be 6 months, and then you come back and you'd be training, spending time with your family, having a few holidays, time to recover. And then you'd maybe be on another 6-month tour, maybe a year later. But here, people have had 3 month back-to-back 6-month tours, 3 6-month back-to-back tours. And we don't know whether there's a wave 3 coming, or, we're in the era of the endemic. It's not pandemic. It's always going to be with us in just a different way. How are you going to live with it? And so you have to see this as a triathlon, not a sprint, not a marathon. It's a triathlon. Because have you evented in triathlons at all? It's a crazy thing to do.
I hate running.
No. Yeah, well, you're very sensible. I'm one of these nutters who does, but I only do the half Olympic, which is much easier. So you swim around a lake in filthy water, and you can hardly see very far. And you're swimming like this. People are swimming over you. It's a bit competitive. But you've got a couple of tours of the lake, and then you can transition. You're going to get out, and then you're going to get on your bike, which is waiting for you in a rack, and you're going to circuit around some racetrack or the streets or whatever, a couple of times, and then you come back, and then you'll do your run, a couple of tours, and then you finish. But today, what business is like a never-ending triathlon. They're not telling you how many loops of the lake you're going to have to swim. And you go, is it finished yet? No, go again. What about it? Go, keep going. Oh, transition, quick transition. Everything's changed. Restructure, rebuild, sack some people, hire some people. Okay, you're on your bike now. And then you go, how many circuits? Just do another one. Oh, perhaps another few. And then transition, right, run. Oh, and then you finish it. You go, I'm through the finish. Yes. They go, great, do it again. Do it again. Whoops, sorry about that. I'm just someone trying to. These days you get this quite a lot, don't you? Where people just turn up, or postman arrives, or dog gets put in your room as wherever he is. I can't see where he is, but that's often what happens. So people have got to be prepared for playing the long game. It's about breathing, bleeding, and shock. It's there's a triage. Is the company they're in still breathing? Is it still alive? Is it hemorrhaging cash? Is it bleeding cash? And are the leaders in it in a state of shock, or are they actually able to face into the fact that it's changing? And there's some big themes that are coming in business these days. Most of my CEOs, the things they're focusing on are digitalization of their business, ESG, the environment, social and governance issues, diversity, equality, and inclusion, and mental health. I mean, there's many other things, but those are the things that they're focusing on. And the future of work, hybrid working, adapting to a different way, not just we're never going to go back to how it was. It will be different. And so people have to expect things to be changing. And you know what, Jon? As a scientist said to me, this day here that you and I are speaking is the slowest it will ever be. It's never going to get slower than this. It's just accelerating. So be prepared. Have the breaks, have the holidays, get the sleep in, 8 hours of sleep. I have a power nap, 25 minutes, round about 1 o'clock after I've made a big lunch at the end of my fast. And then I'm ready for the second half of the day.
I'm a napper. I love that. Unfortunately, I don't get enough of them. As far as anything, I know we're almost coming at time, so I want to leave space for a couple other questions. Is there anything we haven't covered today that you believe our audience or the world should know?
Wow. Okay, that's a great question, Jon. I think the biggest takeoff that helps anybody is I do feel that your attitude defines your altitude. And having a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, having a mindset of continually learning from other people, and accepting that you are human and you're frail and you'll make mistakes. When I ask a CEO, when was the last time personally you were dead wrong? If they go, let me think about that, Jonathan. Well, really, I can't think. It might have been 1982. I go, really? Well, but if I get a good CEO, they'll go, Jonathan, I do make mistakes frequently. And I say, how quickly do you realize you made a mistake? Very quickly. And how quickly do you apologize and rectify it? Again, I try and do that as quickly as I can. And people are always shocked when a leader or a general, one of the generals said, I don't know. They go, what? But I thought you're the God, you should know. No, I don't know. But what do you think? I want to hear your views. So I think attitude and a mindset of learning, curiosity, and humility and humanity. There's not enough humility around, and people are too driven by results and not being human and realizing they've got to draw the best out of people, not drag it out of them. They've got people choose to follow leaders because they want to, not because they're forced to or brutalized into doing it.
I love that. And this is your space to plug or promote anything you want.
I don't really think there's much I would like to plug or promote. Clearly, if people want to get in touch and they feel they're a leader who wants to be an inspiring leader, I'd be delighted to have a conversation with them about coaching them or a member of their team, or working with the whole of their team. That I love. Or if they want me as a speaker, I love speaking around the world at various events. Like I've really loved being on your show, Jon. It's a great honor to be on the climb. And then if they want to, there's free material on my website, loads of free material, all these podcasts and the videos and the book reviews and top tips. It's just a wealth. People say it's a real little mine, a gold mine of just great learning. So fill your boots, help yourself.
Awesome. Jonathan, I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, thanks, John. It's been a real honor to be with you, and congratulations on your show.
Oh, thank you.